when I got into college, my very first term paper was an analysis of Othello, which I started writing at 8 o'clock the night before it was due. And when I got it back, there was an F on it. And my professor said, look, you're not good at this. If you want to stay in college, you got to learn how to write. Just how to use commas and colons and grammar.
You were told you were not good at writing.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't good at writing. He was right. Because I'd convinced myself that I wasn't an A student, I would sabotage my own work. I'd do the assignments at the last minute, not study hard for the test.
Alan Eskens, best-selling author of crime thrillers, joined the podcast to discuss his new novel, The Quiet Librarian, and how years of daydreaming stories eventually fueled his journey to becoming a successful storyteller.
My job as a writer is not simply to tell you a story. My job is to make you feel something. There's so much to the craft of writing. You think, well, I've read books all my life, I can write a book. It doesn't work that way because I, as a writer, am using psychological techniques on you as a reader.
Welcome to Motivation Monday. We're here with the wonderful Alan Eskens, best-selling author. I'm so excited that you're here. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. I got the privilege of reading your new book, The Quiet Librarian, and I have so many questions for you.
And I hopefully have answers for you.
So we talked a little bit about this earlier, but can you preface what this novel is about? It's a bit different than your other books.
Yes. So my previous 9 novels all involve this community of characters that I created in my debut novel, The Life We Bury, where I just kind of told their stories going forward. But this idea came to me. I was on my way to a library to do an event. And before leaving to go to the library, I had some time to kill. So I turned on the TV and there's a movie on called The Reader. And I'd seen it before, so I'm watching it. And in that movie, there's a female character, a middle-aged woman in Germany, who has this secret that nobody knows about. And about a third of the way into the movie, you learn this secret, and it changes how you see her. And I like that motif. I've used it in secondary characters before, people with secrets that affect who they are. But I never did it with a protagonist, with my main character. So on the drive to this library event, I thought, if I were to write a novel about a woman with a secret, what would it be? And on that drive, I'm daydreaming because that's what I love daydreaming, and that's my favorite part of being a novelist is the daydreaming part. And sometimes you'll daydream an idea and it'll come and go and say, yeah, that wasn't that good of an idea, but sometimes they stick with you. And this one just grabbed hold. Because I was on my way to a library event, I think that's in part why my protagonist became a librarian, but also because as I'm writing the novel and I'm creating the character, she would want to work at a place that's quiet and safe. So she's a middle-aged woman. She's, I think, 47 in the novel. Which I think technically is middle-aged. And if not, my apologies. But she works at a library, and she's quiet. She's kind of blends in the background. She's happy with that. But she has this secret past that no one knows about, where she came of age and was forged in the fire of the war in Bosnia. And it was in Bosnia where she became this militia fighter and eventually something of a legend as a warrior and had to flee. And she's been living here in the United States for 30 years, kind of hiding. And so that's where the story came about. It's just me daydreaming about this, what would I do if I had a female character like that? And the more I daydreamed about it, the more I thought about it, the more I really loved Hannah, this character.
I was going by Hannah, but now I know Hannah.
My narrator wanted to make sure that I used the European pronunciation of it.
Hannah.
Yes.
Okay, let me ask you this question. So we kind of talked earlier, you're Dutch, correct?
I am.
How do you know that you are portraying this accurately? I know that you had kind of sources that you talked to. This is about Bosnia and Serbia. You want to be well aware. How did you go about within the process?
Yes. So the idea of having her come from Bosnia was really, I went online and said, okay, what was happening in the world 30 years ago? And one of the main things happening in the world was the war in Bosnia. So I thought, okay, that's going to be her backstory. And then the more I got to researching the war in Bosnia, the more I became aware that I was not going to be able to write this book and this character without the help of people who were there. It is a very complex and sometimes confusing war. It was Yugoslavia falling apart, and all these little breakaway nations, each one had their own story, and Bosnia's was the worst of all of them. And as I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do this, and I'm getting deeper and deeper into this research, I decided to reach out to the Bosnian community. So I sent out emails to two different places. One was the Cultural Center at the University of Minnesota, and the other was the Bosnian Center in Minneapolis, where we have a lot of refugees here. And I was very fortunate that they reached back. The Cultural Center put me in touch with a doctor who teaches at the university named Irma, and the Cultural Center put me in contact with a man named Elvir. They both were growing up in the war, during the war in Bosnia. Elvir fought in the trenches in a city called Srebrenica, which is very important to the history of the war, but also important to my novel. And Irma grew up in a city called Banja Luka, where she was a minority Muslim Bosnian surrounded by Serbs. And so I spent a lot of time with these two people, just talking to them about what it was like growing up in the war in general, and then more specifically, what's it like to be a Muslim in that community, in that world. And then we got down to the more finer points. What kind of food do you prefer to eat? What's your favorite dish? You drink Turkish coffee or regular coffee? Just the little details that I wanted to get right in this novel. So it was their guidance that allowed me to write this book at all. I couldn't have written it without them. And when you open the book up, there's a dedication to them that I heartfelt. I really couldn't have done this without them.
Alan, how does it feel being able to be the storyteller, to share somebody's story that they wouldn't have without you?
As a novelist, like I said, I like to daydream and just create stories in my head and write them on paper. But when I started writing this one, I had to write that backstory, that history part of it, with reverence and care, because these people went through a lot. And I'm not a 14-year-old Muslim Bosnian girl, so I don't know that world. So I had a sense of reverence when I wrote this, that I wanted to get it accurate. I wanted to get it so that I conveyed what it was like to be there. And one of the greatest compliments that I received was after I finished the manuscript. I gave it to both of them to read, just to tell me if I got anything wrong. And Elvir, the man who was in Srebrenica, when I sat down with him, he asked me, he goes, was this based on something, a true story, like a real person? I said, no. He goes, well, it reads like it does. It reads like this person was actually there in the war with me.
I agree.
And that was such an honor for him to say that. I took it with a great deal of weight to do a good job.
Wonderful. I want to share with you my favorite quote.
Okay.
I remember, I don't typically put like sticky notes in books and whatnot, but I was like, I have to for this part. It said something along the lines, this was on page 53. Yes. It was something along the lines of, she's like, well, why are you always, and I don't mean to ruin the story, go get it first, but it was something along the lines about, well, why are you always stuck in the past? And she was like, because my family's there. Yes. I was like, oh my God, that was so beautiful. I just want to give you credit for that line because like really stuck with me. And I think it's kind of fascinating. I do want to talk a little bit about how you got to be a novelist. You kind of had an interesting past. You were a criminal defense attorney.
I was.
And you kind of parted into being a novelist. Did you always know you were going to do this, or was this kind of something that happened on its own time?
No, I never thought I was going to do this until I graduated law school. So I am someone who was a goofball in grade school and high school. I'm someone who I was not geared towards going to college. My dad owned a drywall company, and I actually believed I was going to do construction for the rest of my life, which would have been fine. But then I got into theater in high school. And being in theater, I really loved it. And I saw that there was something besides construction that I was good at, and I wanted to keep doing it. And so the only way I thought I would be able to keep doing it is if I went to college and studied theater. And that's what got me to knuckle down and try and get my grades up so I can go to college. But I didn't think I was smart enough to even go to college. I barely got in. And once I got in college, I started to realize that I wasn't as stupid as I thought I was. Eventually, I became a straight A student, but it was more an issue of confidence than anything else. Because I'd convinced myself that I wasn't an A student, I would sabotage my own work. I'd do the assignments at the last minute, not study hard for the test. But then when I realized that I could actually get A's, that changed, and I became a straight A student. Then I thought, well, that was fun. Let's see what law school would be like. And really, with no greater reason than to see if I could do it, I went to law school. So I graduated law school, and I get a job in St. Peter, and I'm working for a judge, and I realized that there's a part of my life that's missing, and it was that creativity that I loved so much in theater. And that's when I just picked up, I was sitting at a keyboard. I just started writing a short story just to exercise my creative side. And I did that for 20 years, just writing, studying writing, taking classes in writing, learning the craft, just so I could be a better writer just for my own fun. And I worked on a single manuscript for most of that 20 years. And after 20 years, it wasn't ready, so I set it aside. And I had another idea for another story, so I sat down and wrote that story. And that only took me 2 years. And when I finished that, I thought it was good enough to maybe get published. So I sought to get it published. It became published. It became my debut novel, The Life We Bury. So that got me going. It became a bestseller. And in 2017, I left behind the practice of law. But really, I did it just for my own fun for a long time. And I think that made a big difference. I didn't have this pressure where I'm going to write a book, I got to get published just to prove that I could do it. It was more, I'm going to write because I enjoy it. And when the book came along that I thought was good enough to get published, then I became a published author.
Can we talk a little bit about something you had said, that you felt like you weren't smart enough to do this? I feel like that's something that pushes a lot of people away from writing. I feel like everybody has a story in them, at least one. I'm a big believer in that. And I think, how did you kind of cope with those negative thoughts? Oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. I know you had mentioned it was a little bit for fun, but I'm sure you had to kind of be disciplined and push those thoughts away.
I had to. When I got into, I struggle with reading, which is a weird thing for an author to say, but I've always struggled with reading. I'm not the kind of person who can just pick up a book and lose myself in a book. My brain doesn't allow that to happen. My brain's constantly, I'll see a sentence or a clause or a word that pops me out of the story, and I'm daydreaming my own story for some reason. So I've always struggled with reading. When I got into college, my very first term paper was an analysis of Othello, which I started writing at 8 o'clock the night before it was due. And when I got it back, there was an F on it. And my professor said, look, you're not good at this. If you want to stay in college, you got to learn how to write. Just how to use commas and colons and grammar.
You were told you were not good at writing.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't good at writing. He was right. And because I was enjoying college and I wanted to stay there, I went out and bought books that would teach me how to write essays, just grammatical books. E.B. White and Donald Strunk's Elements of Style was one of the books. And I read them just to catch up to where I should have been in college because I wanted to stay in college because I was enjoying it. And that helped a great deal. Now all of a sudden my grades are starting to come up and I'm starting to think, okay, it's not that I'm stupid. It's just that I wasn't paying attention in 8th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade through 12th when I should have been paying attention. I got some catching up to do. And so I caught up. And then I think I was a junior when I got on the dean's list for the first time. And that shocked me. I mean, when you say, how do you overcome it? It was things like getting on the dean's list. That was validation, saying, okay, you really are smart enough to be on the dean's list. You did it. Now do better. And when I got into law school, it was all about proving to myself that I could do it. And I graduated law school with a really good resume. I was on law review. I have international award for my legal writing in the Jessup Moot Court competition. I did everything, but it was along the way receiving some validation every now and again. And one of the things goes back to my teachers. I had teachers who would give up on me, but I also had teachers who would push me, and I had teachers who would encourage me to do things that I didn't think I could do myself. My fifth grade teacher got me into the school play in fifth grade. I had no idea they were even doing a play. It wasn't my idea. She said, "Come here, Alan, I want you to audition for this play." And to be in the play, you're supposed to be a sixth, seventh, or eighth grader, and I was a fifth grader. So they had to make an exception. But my teacher saw something in me. And that was one more little step saying, okay, so you're not this idiot kid. You can actually, people can believe in you. So it was little things along the way that eventually built up to having the confidence that I have today.
What advice or wisdom would you share to somebody that kind of is in a similar boat where they would like to write or paint or do something creative, but they don't feel like they're good enough, smart enough, or there yet?
When I first started writing, I read a book it's called On Becoming a Novelist by John Gardner. And early on in the book, Mr. Gardner says, you either have talent or you don't. And you should learn quickly which of those it is so you don't live a frustrated life. Something to that effect. I read that and I was mad. I was angry with him because I thought to myself, I don't have talent as a writer, but I think I can understand the craft at a broken down level that I can make people think I have talent. So understanding the craft of writing was what I focused on. There's so much to the craft of writing. You think, well, I've read books all my life, I can write a book. It doesn't work that way because I, as a writer, am using psychological techniques on you as a reader.
What are they?
Well,
Can you share?
Yeah. They're not secrets. They're secrets to you readers, and you may not enjoy reading as much once you learn these secrets. But profluence, as much as I dislike John Gardner, this is something that he taught in his book. Profluence is from the beginning of a book, from the first page, first paragraph, you should be infusing the book with questions, expectations, and suspicions in the reader's mind, and then delaying answering those questions or showing those expectations. That psychologically creates in the reader this need to find out. So when someone says, I couldn't put the book down, it's not because this writer just happened to tell a really good story. It's because the writer is intentionally doing stuff that make you think, okay, if I turn the page, that question that I had, the subconscious feeling I need to have something answered, will be fulfilled. And it's not. It's delayed. Another chapter, another 2 chapters. Now all of a sudden that question's answered, but I've raised 3 more questions in the meantime. Or, that's just one of the craft things. Understanding how tension works. That if you're trying to create tension and you have at stake the person is either going to be alive at the end or dead at the end, those are as far apart as you can make them. That creates more tension than, will I get a piece of pizza or not get a piece of pizza? Knowing that that you can't create tension unless there's insecurity as to the answer. I have killed characters in my novels that my readers are mad at me for killing. But at the same time, if I never surprise you with a death that you're not expecting, you're never going to feel tension when when a character gets into trouble. When I read a novel, even by very well-known authors, who have a serious character that goes from novel to novel to novel, I know that author is never going to kill that series character because that's their bread and butter. So whenever that character gets into a fight, I know that character is going to come out okay. When they get into a car accident, I know they're going to be okay. When I watch a Marvel movie and they get into these long fight scenes, that bores me because I know who the heroes are. I know who's going to win the fights. Very rarely do you have a marquee player character not win a fight. And so that is part of building tension, is having that insecurity in the reader as to, is this going to turn out okay or not? that's just one of 10,000 aspects of craft that I could talk about. But understanding that craft at a micro level, at a subconscious, psychological level, is how I got around John Gardner's "You either have talent or you don't." Well, I'm going to understand how to write a novel so that it appears like I have talent, even if I don't, because I understand how the writing process works.
Gotta get this book. Well, I'm always curious as a writer, as an author, I'm sure that every author is different. Do you start with the ending in your head, or is it kind of as the plot goes on, then you kind of figure out what your ending's going to be?
I start out with 2 seeds of an idea. One seed is the external plot. So I'm considered a mystery thriller writer. That's the external plot, solving the mystery, catching the villain. Then I turn around, what's the internal plot? What's the second plot? The plot that is going to make my reader feel something. That's the part of the story that I really enjoy the most. So, for example, I don't want to talk about the Quiet Librarian too much, I think, but in The Life We Bury, it's my character is trying to solve whether or not this guy he's interviewing in a nursing home is actually a murderer because he spent 30 years in prison, or was he falsely convicted? So there's the external plot. But really it's about my character Joe running away from home, trying to leave his responsibility for his autistic younger brother. That's what the story is really about. And I use the mystery thriller plot as a vehicle to tell this human story plot. So when I begin a story, it's okay, what are my 2 plot lines, the external and internal? Then once I have an idea that sticks with me, now I think, how's the ending going to be? I go to the ending because it's got to have a satisfactory ending, one that hopefully leaves the reader wanting to put the book down and not pick another book up for a little while at least.
Okay.
Until they get over that book hangover. So what's the ending going to be? Now, if I can figure out a really good ending, now I have the basic structure. Let's go to the middle, and how do we get from here to there in the most entertaining and engaging and intense way?
I have a kind of a personal question for you. This is my first year working, and it's a new schedule, new timeline. So how do you find the time to write? How does that work? What's your writing process like? Do you like writing in the morning with a cup of coffee? Are you a night writer? What's your routine like?
Well, now that I just have the one job, it's very relaxed. I get up in the morning, have my breakfast, go down and I'll write for an hour or so. Usually it's more just trying to get into my head what that day's assignment is. Then I'll go work out, go for a walk, take the dogs for a walk, go for a jog. And in that time, I'm thinking about that assignment. How am I going to tell this little section as best I can? Have lunch, go back. Now I'll write for 3 hours. I try and do about 1,000 words a day. And
on the laptop, handwriting? Okay.
Laptop, I sit in a recliner with my feet up, laptop on my lap. It's the most comfortable way to make a living.
Oh, that's a job.
It is. I once had a teacher in high school. I used to always sit with my feet up on the desk in front of me, and they used to tell me not to do that. And at one point, the teacher said, someday, Alan, you're going to have a job where you can't sit with your feet up like that. You got to get used to it. And it's like, oh, I told you. But yeah, no, I will write until I'm satisfied with what I've written. And when I close my computer for the day, it's still in my head what tomorrow's assignment's going to be. And so it's a lot of thinking and daydreaming and just, what if I did this or what if I did that? And paying attention to what's going on around me. How can I, make that next paragraph different than other writers might write it, and that kind of thing.
I want to talk about something I've noticed, and you could correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like most people I talk to, they remember somebody in their past that told them, no, you can't do this. And I feel like you've kind of talked a little bit about your past when teachers might not have been as supportive or pushing you. They've kind of been pushing their ways. Is it kind of like you look back and you're like, aha, I did it? Like it was a motive for you, or what are your thoughts on that?
I had more teachers tell me, no, you can't do that, than teachers tell me that, yes, I can. My guidance counselor, in The Life We Bury, there's a scene where he says, my guidance counselor never mentioned going to college in our meetings. And that comes from, when I went to my guidance counselor as a senior and I said, I want to go to college. She said, Alan, you're not college material. But she was right. When you look at my...
Look at me now.
And we're friends on Facebook now. So, but when you look at my school records, I was getting straight A's in anything theater related, chorus classes, theater classes, that kind of stuff. Anything that didn't have homework, I usually did pretty well. But those classes that you would normally look at and say those are college prep kind of classes, I was getting C's and D's in, even a few F's. So, yeah, when she looked at my report cards, I did not look like college material. But at the same time, I was going to be a theater major, and how smart you got to be a theater major. So I didn't listen to her, and I tried it anyway.
I think I had a similar experience. I feel like usually when you're in high school, they're kind of prepping you for this one path, and they don't really, not that they don't let you, but you're not often allowed to tap into your creativity. That's kind of like a side thing, Most people are like, no, I have to be a scientist, a lawyer, a doctor, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's kind of fascinating how you went that way, and then you kind of shifted back to your creative side. I think that's really cool.
And when I talk to high schools, sometimes the teachers say, well, how do I get my students to do what you did, to find, that reason to go to college or, find something they wanted to do. And my answer to them was find out what they want to do. I mean, if someone is really into cars, then encourage them to understand motors and the technology for building cars and the history of cars. And if somebody's really into construction, like some of our brothers are, focus on that. Make what they're interested in something important, as opposed to, well, there's that, but there's also the science or thing that you should do to go to college, because in the end, a person who goes to college is not necessarily more happy than a person who doesn't, as long as you find the job that is the job you want, the dream job for you.
Do you view this as your dream job? Do you view it as your purpose here on Earth?
This is my dream job. It
Wow.
really is. Because all those years of daydreaming, all those report cards, Alan doesn't pay attention. Alan's not in class.
So discouraging.
Yeah. Every single report card nearly, Alan doesn't pay attention. They didn't realize I was writing in my head. I didn't realize I was
doing
writing.
work right now, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Excuse me. I got a plot. I'm trying to hone out here.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I'd love to talk a little bit about that because I know you mentioned, I saw a video earlier, but I'd love to hear it from your perspective. You would daydream during class all the time and you were writing these stories. Can you expand a little bit?
Yeah. So when other kids could sit anywhere they wanted to in class, I was usually assigned a seat that was nowhere near a window. Because if I looked out a window, I would catch a glimpse of something and I couldn't take my mind off. I would daydream. And I was prolific. I was really good at daydreaming. I was the hero in every story. There was this class I took in high school where I was tasked with writing a short story. And this is the first time I'd ever written a short story. And I just took one of my daydreams and I wrote it as a short story. And as always, I turned it in late. But I didn't turn it in late because I was delaying it, because I was procrastinating. I turned it in late because I started writing it and I couldn't stop. The assignment was 5 to 7 pages. I turned in 11 pages of a short story because my mind is like, oh, yeah, and let's have them do this, and then that, and then that. And so I just kept going with the story, and I turned it in late, and I expected to get a C because I turned it in late, but my teacher gave it back to me, and if I recall, I got an A on it. And she actually said, and oh, by the way, when I turned it in, I gave it a title, The Farthest Horizon. I gave it a cover, like it's a novel, and I put on there, Reader's Digest condensed version. Now, you might not know what a Reader's Digest condensed version is, but back in the day, well, they still do. Reader's Digest would take a novel, and they would condense it from 310 pages down to 120. And they would put 3 or 4 of these in a volume and sell them. And my mother had a collection of Reader's Digest condensed versions. And I thought the epitome of being a novelist was to be in a Reader's Digest condensed version volume.
Mine is New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, well, I know that now. But she gave it back to me and I got an A on it. And she actually said, have you ever thought about writing to get published? And I was such a flippant jerk as a kid. I just rolled my eyes and said no, because again, in my head, I was a drywaller. I was in construction and that just wasn't me. But I will have you know that my last novel, Saving Emma, is now a Reader's Digest condensed version.
Congrats.
So I've made it.
Very cool. I would love to talk about that. So when you had these daydreams or visions, were you imagining what the cover looked like? Did you have that picture in your mind? Did you kind of see what it looked like? Or
See, I didn't daydream about writing a novel. I just daydreamed scenarios where I was a pirate and, sword fighting. I was, fighting the Northwest Passage. I was in the Battle of the Bulge. It was, me put into different TV shows basically. And it wasn't where I sat down and thought, okay, what am I going to daydream about today? It would be, I would look out, spark of a reflective sun would catch my attention, and boom, I'm daydreaming a story in my head, and I can't help it. I can't stop it. And that's why when I was supposed to be reading books in school, I would start reading, and all of a sudden in my head, something else is going on. And I'm looking at the page, I'm looking at the words, but I'm not reading because my head is doing something else.
I always thought that was a bad thing. I do that too.
Well, it's what stopped me from being a good reader. My brain just doesn't let me stay in a story or even a textbook. So when I got into college, one of the things that I figured out is if I go to the used bookstore, which I went to because I was broke anyway, but I would sit down in the aisle and I would look at all the different versions of this textbook I needed to buy. And I would look at the first chapter and I would try and find the one where the person who owned it before me did a really good job of highlighting. Because then I would buy that book, read the highlights, take the test, and do well. I wouldn't have to read the whole book. And some people highlight everything, which is a waste of time. Other people don't highlight enough. So I find that that Goldilocks highlighter, I buy that book, and that helped me become a better grades, at least. Maybe not a better student, but I got better grades for it.
Are you an avid reader now?
I am not. I still struggle with reading. I listen to novels now.
You have your own way. You have your own way of reading.
And so when I'm listening to a novel, it keeps going. So when my brain disengages and starts doing something else, it keeps going and it forces me to go back to the story. I do novels now, but I do them on audio for the most part. I read novels like people ask me to blurb their novels, and so I'll get books from. So you look at the back and say, this book is really good. It says Alan Eskens.
Oh, okay.
So people ask me to blurb their books. So when I get one of those, they don't have audios for those yet. So I'll read the hard copy of those. But for the most part, I do audiobooks.
You seem very in tune with your imagination and creative side, which I feel like a lot of people start to kind of lose as they get older. I don't know, maybe that's just an assumption. How do you, or what advice do you give to people that want to be creative and want to tap into their imagination and just don't know how?
It is hard to keep that at the forefront. When I was practicing law, my mind was always on the next case, the next argument, the next brief. The daydreaming I would do was a closing argument or an appellate argument. And that's not always creative because you focus on, arguing it in a way that they taught you in law school and applying the facts and law in a certain way. It is not that creative. And when I became a published author and I realized that this was something that I want to do more seriously, it freed up a side of my brain where as I'm walking down a hallway, and before I would just pass something and not even take notice, now I take notice of it as something that might help me with a creative idea. You hear something in one ear and out the other ear when you're busy working, but when you're in your creative mode, it goes in and it's like, oh, wait, that might be an interesting way to tell this story. So I started focusing on purpose on everything around me, how that could be used creatively. I would be sitting there waiting for a hearing, and instead of thinking about, another case or another client, I'm thinking, okay, if I were going to describe that person walking down the hall, how would I describe them? If I were going to describe this room, what words would I use?
You'd have exercises, basically.
And one of my favorite exercises is if I'm going to be going for a walk, say, I'll open a book, any book, a dictionary, manual or a novel, open a book, find a word that's a little unusual, close the book, and then go for your walk. And as I'm walking, my daydreaming that is going to happen anyway is now got something to focus on. So I'm focusing on how can I use that word in a metaphor or a simile or an analogy somehow where I've never heard it used that way before. An example, I opened a book once and saw the word caterpillar, closed the book. And as I'm going for a walk with my dogs, I'm thinking, okay, how could I use caterpillar in a way it's never been used before? And I have a little notebook I write these things down in. And what I came up with was, and it made it into, I think, The Stolen Hours, my novel. My character is talking about this pompous guy, and she says, he's a worm who thinks he's a caterpillar. So that little analogy would not have come to me had I not opened that book and gone through that exercise. So I have this notebook full of these little, I don't know, quips, words, and little details that I have put aside just in case at some point I am stuck. I open that up. Does anything here fit, work? Nope. And if so, I'll use it. And so just like little things to exercise my creative side.
I feel like if I find a word that's like I don't typically hear, I'll write that down and be like, okay, I got to start using this word and like challenge myself and find like bigger words, better words. You know what I mean?
Well, it's not necessarily the bigger words. It's like, erudite. I don't think, I may have used erudite in a book. I don't think that I have, but it's more just the more common words, using them in a way that hasn't been done before. I was trying to find a way to say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That's a cliche. I don't want to use a cliche. So I'm thinking, I'm going for a walk. What could I use instead? And it's one of my most quoted quotes in that scene where Joe goes to the guidance counselor. She never brought up college. It might have been the fact that I wore hand-me-down clothes or secondhand clothes. It might have been the fact that I got a job as soon as I turned old enough to become a bouncer at a bar. Or, and this is my bet, it might have been that she knew my mother and knew that you can't change the sound of an echo. So that's the apple fall from the tree metaphor. You can't change the sound of the echo. The idea being that because the guidance counselor knew Joe's mother, she was putting on Joe certain attributes that she knew about the mother. But the point of it is using that language in a different way. Just little, there's no 10-cent words in there. Changing the sound of an echo is just, a different way of saying it. But again, it's one of those creative exercises where I'm trying to just use more common words in new ways.
I feel like it's so fascinating because you're doing these practices and exercises, and it's helping you grow as a writer. I feel like most people don't do this stuff. I don't know anybody that looks at a word and is like, you know what, I'm going to think on this. I'm going to ponder. You know what I mean? So that's really cool.
And it's all because I'm trying to prove John Gardner wrong.
I also want to ask you, okay, you wrote your last sentence in your book. You're closing that book. You're done. What is your end goal? What do you want readers to feel?
I want them to feel emotion. I really do. And in all my books, there is a scene that I think should bring them at least some feeling of emotion. Some people actually come to tears. Some people don't even notice it and just move on. But as I'm writing that novel, I'm building to this scene in subtle ways so that when that scene comes, again, I go back to my craft. Here's how you write that scene in a way that if a person is going to feel emotion, this is the way to do it. And I want them to put my book down and pause before picking up the next book. Just waiting a little bit to let this one stay with them for a while, because either they feel good about it, sad about it, they feel something. My job as a writer is not simply to tell you a story. My job is to make you feel something. Mm-hmm. And that, when you talk about craft, that is one of the most difficult things, because people come to reading a novel from very, very different places, and it's hard to know what's going to touch the heart of one person versus another. But you really want them to experience something as they read the novel, not just the intellectual exercise of reading a story.
Is it a beautiful feeling? Let's say there's 100 people that read this book in a room, and one person likes this part of your book, the other likes this part. I think it's so fascinating that everybody resonates with something else. I feel like as an author, I'd feel so excited to be like, oh my gosh, I touched this many people.
It is extremely, and it's extremely exciting. And I didn't realize that was going to be part of the journey until The Life We Bury came out, and people would write to me, and say things like, I was in Vietnam, and that scene where they're on the sandbags, I actually had that conversation with my buddy. Or my mother was like Kathy. I couldn't keep from crying when I read that part of the story. Or, I've got a sister who's autistic, and you nailed it. And so yeah, they bring their own lives to the novel they're reading, and they're going to highlight in their own minds certain parts of the novel that resonate and relate to them the most.
I think that is interesting. When you read a book, you're always not comparing, but bringing your life into it. I feel like every reader does that. And especially with this book, because it kind of is placed in Bosnia. Like, I've never been to Bosnia. I've never, thank God, never been in a war or anything like that. But I still related to it. I still felt for her. I felt like I was there. You know what I mean? I think it's a very hard task to do, and you did wonderful. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about most of your books, correct me if I'm wrong, they're based in Minnesota.
Yes, I have one novel, Nothing More Dangerous, that is set in Missouri, where I grew up.
Okay.
The character is 15 years old, and it's 1976, and that is where I was when I was 15 years old in 1976. So that's why it's based there. But yeah, all the other novels are here in Minnesota.
Do you see yourself bringing a part of your life into a lot of these books?
Absolutely. There's an old adage, and it's misused, but the adage is write what you know. And some people think, okay, well, I'm a realtor, so I have to write about real estate. And that's not what it means. What it means is when you write a story about, a guy living on a different planet even, give that character aspects of daily life that you understand. When I went to college, I was dead broke. So when I wrote about Joe Talbert, I made him broke. He had so many worries about, will I be able to pay for this semester? He has to at one point bail his mother out, and that little bit of money was vital to him. People who have lived on the edge of poverty, who've been poor, will relate to that. And so what you do is you bring aspects of your personal life to your characters, to your story, to give the story authenticity. So even though I'm writing about a 14-year-old Muslim girl in Bosnia in 1995, I'm writing about her relationship with her brother, her love for her father and mother, her love for her country, things that everybody who reads the book should be able to relate to, even if they've never lived there. The cold, the heat, the hunger, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs doesn't just apply to people in America. It applies to everybody, no matter where you are. And so giving these characters that part of yourself, your experience, makes them more authentic.
I know that you said that you typically write thriller, suspense books, but this one's historical fiction, which I feel like has a bit of suspense as well. Do you ever see yourself going into a completely different territory, something that you've never written before?
I do.
Not to give anything away.
You know how I wrote for 20 years just for my own fun? I'm doing screenplays now just for my own fun.
Cool.
I've written a comedy.
That's a bit different.
That's a huge different thing. I do have research that I've been doing for a complete... So The Quiet Librarian is part historical fiction, part mystery thriller. So it's told in two timelines. The 1995-1990 Bosnian War timeline is historical fiction, but the present day is really a mystery thriller. And so it's about Hannah today trying to figure out who has come from her past to try and kill her. And then the historical fiction is telling the reader over the course of the novel, here's why somebody would want to do that. But yes, I have another story idea that I've been researching for 7 or 8 years now, which is completely historical fiction. I've been outlining it now and again. I'll write it someday, but I don't know when. It's going to take a lot of, it's a behemoth of a project. So someday I'll write it, but not right now.
I'll invite you back in the future when you do. I'll be
Okay.
excited to hear about it. When you had said to make a good book, there's an exterior and an interior. Do you have to have that in a good book? Can it be just one kind of plot, or
No.
because I've noticed that like in good books, there's always those two kind of plots that you don't even know that they're kind of intertwined.
It all depends on what the reader wants. There is a genre called cozy fiction. My understanding of cozy fiction is it's like a Mrs. Marple, or it's a more simple murder mystery where there's no blood and gore, no sex or violence, but it's more of a kind of a quiet, cozy mystery. And while you do have relationships in those, I don't know that the novels necessarily depend on that aspect of it. I think people read it more just for the solving of the crime by this person that they really adore as a primary character. But when you get into more literary novels, you do have to have a deeper theme. You have to have relationships. You have to have a character-driven story in order to have that emotional payoff.
And I don't know if I can mention this because this was in the book, but if not, I'll edit it out. The marble, the significance of the marble. Why a marble?
Why not?
Is it just something kind of...
In writing terms, it's called a talisman. So a talisman is a physical object that takes you from one place to another. So
There's so much psychology behind this.
There is. So, for example, in one of my novels, early on in the novel, these two brothers are smoking cigars in a boat on a lake in northern Minnesota. And the one brother has these, it's called backwoods cigars. It's just crappy, cheap cigars. And the other brother's kind of making fun of him for it. At the end of the novel, the younger brother, and by brothers, they're like in their 30s, the younger brother shows up at that lake, at that boat, and so much has transpired between that first boat scene and the second one where he's standing there and he looks down and he sees that old package of cigars that he left behind in the boat. And it takes him back all the things that happened in between, and he's having this catharsis because of that talisman, because of that cigar package that's in there. So the marble is a talisman. It connects things from one time period to another. And that's really what it is.
Interesting. I might ask you a little cliche question because I'm always curious. You know, you've written 10 novels. That's such a huge milestone, such a huge accomplishment. Do you ever face imposter syndrome? Is that a thing for you, or is that like, no, I just am here and that's that?
I don't. As I talked about earlier, I was facing imposter syndrome most of my life. But when I was writing for me. I was writing because I enjoyed it. If nobody ever read my work, I would still write because that's what I do for fun. You know, I can talk about a well-constructed paragraph the way my brothers talk about sinking a 20-foot putt. So it was just something that I enjoy doing. And the fact that I'm able to make a living at it astounds me, really. This is what I do for fun. So, yeah, I've never had imposter syndrome because if people tomorrow decide they don't want to buy my books, I had fun. I'll still write just for me. I'll write screenplays just for me. I'll do that stuff because I enjoy it. And, I'll be okay.
Love that. Do you have like a community that kind of supports you, that you guys pass the work to each other and read over, or is it kind of like a one-man show?
In the earlier days, it's really important to join a community, a writer's group. And what I would do is I would go to take a class at the Loft, for example. And in that class, I would be looking at my fellow students and trying to figure out which ones I thought really had talent or really had the ability to write well. And I would try and join a writer's group with them because I always wanted to punch up. I wanted to have people who I thought were better than me so I could improve my writing. And I would form writer's groups. And then what you do in the writer's group is you take turns. It's my turn. I've written a chapter. Here's my chapter. I pass it out. Everybody reads it, and then everybody gives you critique. If you have a bad writer's group, yeah, you're getting critique from people who are giving you bad advice. But if you have a good writer's group, they're trying to help you and elevate your work. Once you become a published author, though, I still have my first reader is my wife, then my agent, then my editor.
Oh.
And so I have a editor at Mulholland, my publisher, whose job it is to make my story better. That's her job, and I trust her. After she's done, it goes to another editor who's there to correct all my many, many grammatical and typographical errors. But you have a team, which when you're just starting out, you don't have that team. And so the writers group is really important, I think.
Wonderful. And for people that would love to read your wonderful books, where could they go?
Just about anywhere. Barnes & Noble, you can get them online. I really encourage people to buy them at local bookstores. Local bookstores, I'm going to be doing a number of events where I go and sign books. Amazon never invites me to go sign books. Yeah. But Barnes & Noble here in Mankato, on the 22nd, I'll be there at 1 o'clock signing books. I'll be at Majors and Quinn. I'll be down in Iowa City.
That's where I went to college.
Me too.
Iowa City?
I started in Iowa City, finished in Minnesota.
You went to University of Iowa?
I did.
So did I.
I love that town.
They're an amazing creative writing school.
They are. And I took many classes. They have a summer writers festival where I'd go and take classes when I was just practicing.
You're kidding.
No.
I took a lot of creative writing classes there. They were wonderful.
When I was there, I didn't even know about the creative writing. I was a theater major at the time. So I didn't know that existed. But yeah, now I wish I had known about it.
Prairie Whites, is that where you're going?
No, it's Sidekicks over.
Sidekicks Coffee.
Yes.
That's so funny. Okay. I love that. Well, let me ask you one last question before we wrap up. What would you say to your younger self if you could?
Believe in yourself. There was so much self-doubt throughout my younger years. You know, like I said, I really thought I wasn't smart enough to go to college. I really thought I couldn't do a lot of things that now I know I could have if I tried. And it would be that. It would be have faith. You know, don't let people tell you can't do something. You can do it.
Oh, I love that. Well, Alan, I appreciate your time. It was so lovely talking to you. I loved your novel, and I can't wait to read this one. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Natalia. It was such a joy talking to you.
Yeah, of course.